Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Okay, so something that I want to do right now is talk about my books as I'm reading them. Cut that blooper reel. I'm sorry. Okay, so this is a recent reads video. However, I am filming this as I finish each book. Not in the moment as I'm reading it, but like as soon as I finish the book, because I feel like I am reading slower right now, and by the time I have enough books to talk about for a recent reads video, I have forgotten details, but I'm also not feeling like mentally, emotionally prepared to fully vlog right now, but I still want to talk about these books. So I just finished a book this morning that is one of my most anticipated reads of 2024. It is The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Katherine Arden. Katherine Arden is one of my favorite authors. Her Winter Night trilogy, which starts with The Bear and the Nightingale, is one of my all-time favorite series, all-time favorite books. Like, I love and adore every single thing about that series. I've talked about it a lot because I just reread it at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. And it's just, I think it's beautiful and emotional and just this stunning tale of a girl who's just very normal, who rises up above this great evil, and there's tragedy, there's loss, but there's this overwhelming sense of hope at the end of that book, and even along the way. So, but I haven't really read anything else by Katherine Arden. I don't believe that she has written anything else for adults other than The Warm Hands of Ghosts, which comes out next year. I know she has written some middle grade stuff, but I haven't tried it. Although after I have finished this book, I am really interested in reading it just because I just eat up her words. I think she's fantastic. So this book, I saw it was coming out. I follow the author everywhere, obviously. And as soon as I saw her say the ARCs were up, I immediately went and requested it. And I was so very happy to get an ARC for this book. And it's just been calling to me ever since I got it. So it doesn't come out until February of 2024. But I just needed to read it, even though I have other ARCs that I needed to read first. This was the book that was calling to me. So the basic premise of this book is it's set in World War I, around the times of 1917, 1918, when the war is starting to come to a close, but it's still pretty brutal. And we have our main character, Laura, who is a nurse, and her brother, Freddie, who is serving in the war. They're Canadian, they're like French Canadian, and the whole story begins when Laura is sort of recovering from a ship that had exploded and bombed basically in Canada, and her parents' house was right near the sea, and it destroyed her parents' house and killed both of her parents. She had come back from the war because she was so injured, so she was not living at home with her parents. She was taking care of like some elderly women as a nurse, so she wasn't there when the bombing happened, and she is the only survivor of that massacre that happened. Her parents were killed. She ends up, two things happen with her. She ends up getting a invitation to go and serve in a private sector hospital in, I believe, France or Belgium, to, aid in the war efforts as a nurse. And she also receives a package of her brother's war uniform, like his coat that's covered in blood and his dog tags, with the comment that he is presumed dead, that he's missing. And so she is really at a low point in her life. She is devastated by the loss of her brother, who she was very close with, and she feels a lot of guilt and obviously grief over the loss of her parents. Guilt because she wasn't there, because she didn't get there soon enough to try and save them. And so she is feeling like she's going to go back and serve in this private sector hospital. And she also has this feeling like she kind of wants to find her brother. And this feeling is compounded when she starts to see ghosts. She sees a ghost of her mother. And the way that Katherine Arden describes the ghost of her mother is so chilling and haunting. And like, literally when I started reading this book, I started reading it right around Halloween time. And I was reading it at night. That's usually when I do my reading. I know I've said it before, but I don't sleep well at night. And so the house is very quiet. I just open up my Kindle in bed, it's backlit, and I just read while everybody is sleeping. But, the way that Katherine Arden describes how Laura feels seeing that ghost. And it's not just the ghost of her mother, you know, the sort of this fantastical element of seeing ghosts happens to several people in the book, and it is very unsettling. It's very unsettling, and it was honestly scary for me. So there were a few times where I would come across a scene that was like so unsettling and scary that I'm like, I can't read this right now, we're gonna read something a little happier, and I would pull up a historical romance. But I would always return to it. And then I finally got to this point where I just couldn't put it down, and I just read it all over this last weekend, which I don't know when this video is coming up, so that doesn't make any difference to you. So Laura ends up seeing these ghosts, the ghost of her mother, and she has some of the ghosts communicate with her that you need to go find your brother. He's not dead. You need to go find him. So she's got that like mission in her head as she goes to serve in this hospital that she's going to try and find her brother, but she has no idea how to do that. So her brother ends up that he was in the war and there was this big airstrike. He ends up stuck in a pillbox that had flipped over with a German soldier. So, you know, they're in this very fraught situation where they're in this overturned pillbox. There's no air. They are for sure going to die, they think. And Freddie, her brother, and Winter, the German soldier, they end up saving each other's lives, and because they were there trapped together, they sort of have this like almost like a trauma bond, but it goes deeper than that, where they start to develop feelings for each other, and there's this romantic element that isn't really explored a ton, but it is definitely there, and you feel that these two love each other, and it was really, really beautiful. But they end up through perilous times getting out of the pillbox, but something else happens to Freddie. And that's sort of the mystery of, is he alive? Is he dead? What happened to Laura's brother? How is she going to go and try and find him? So you have all of this very complicated situation happening. You don't know what's happened to her brother. Laura herself is a very closed off character. She's not the type of character that is given to really expressing her emotions. Like, I feel like that's a product of her being in this war and seeing so much trauma, seeing these soldiers come in who were absolutely decimated, almost like they shouldn't be alive, where she had to treat them. And there were a few descriptive scenes in here where we see Laura reacting to these soldiers who are brought in with massive wounds to them that she knows they're not going to make it. And we see a little bit of how that affects her, but you also get the impression that she's seen so many soldiers who have been near death or who have died or who have come in with the most grisly, just absolutely horrific wounds, that she almost feels a little numb to it. And I think that that is something that can make her feel less sympathetic. But I also feel like the thing that Catherine Arden did so well in this book, one of the things, is she really utilizes that to her character's benefit, and that it doesn't feel like she is unfeeling or unsympathetic. You really get the impression that she is almost blocking her emotions from that because she's seen so much. She's not become like cold to it or indifferent to it, but it's almost like she has this armor around herself where she won't allow anything to really affect her. And I think, you know, that's a criticism that I have heard already of this book, where people are like, she's a hard character to connect to. She's difficult to really be sympathetic with because she doesn't really show her emotions. But I feel like it's very, very fitting for her to be that way in this book, because you understand a little bit, just on a few scenes, what she has seen, what she has been through, and how she is surviving in that time, you know? And there are some moments in here where they are definitely very, not super emotional, but you do see her start to process her emotions a little bit better, so she's not completely closed off. But it was just a very stark difference when you compare it. And like, I didn't really compare this at all to The Bear and the Nightingale, because that series is just so different. It has a different type of heroine, it has a different type of plot, it has a different type of structure. It doesn't feel similar really at all. This book, The Warm Hands of Ghosts, feels honestly pretty bleak, and a lot of this feels just very sad and depressing. And while we do have a triumphant ending, it felt like it was a little bit hollow, because it's kind of bittersweet in a way, but also we don't see the ending go in detail. We just get a glimpse of what the triumphant ending is. So I think everything about this book is so different from The Bear and the Nightingale. Even just the way that she puts her prose together, it feels very, there's a lot of brevity here. There are some phrases in here, some sentences, some introspection of the characters that is that typical Catherine Arden that is very beautiful, very lyrical, very emotional, where she just puts words together in a way that gives you a feeling that just makes you, like, hits you right here. But overwhelmingly, this book reads almost like staccato in rhythm. Like, there's not a lot of floweriness to the writing in here, and I think that again was deliberate because of the nature of World War I and how that was going to affect these characters. So the fantastical element of this is obviously the ghosts that are, you know, appearing to specifically Laura, but to other characters. We see ghosts that have, you know, that they knew or that had passed away during the war and things like that. But another fantastical element, and the thing that is really the central point of the plot, is there is a character in here named Falland who plays a fiddle, and he has this hotel that when people find him and they go to visit the hotel, they see this vision of grandeur in this hotel. It's a respite from the war. They're able to go in there and feel like, you know, it's not the end of the world as it feels like when they're out in the battlefield. And they feel a little bit of maybe peace and solace, and and there's a mirror in the hotel that when they look into it, they're able to see what they most desire. And that affects the characters forevermore. And that figure, Falland, the mystical, fantastical figure, is present throughout the entire book. And we're never really sure, although we feel heavily that he's not a good character, even though he sort of presents himself as good at times and as evil at other times. And when you finish the book, it's very clear who he actually is and represents as this figure in the book. And it's interesting. So this book felt less fantastical than The Bear and the Nightingale, because really the only element is this mysterious character, Falland, who lures people to this hotel to, I'm not going to go into detail there because I don't want to spoil anything, and I feel like I've already talked a lot about what the basic plot of this is. And then we have the fact that they can see ghosts. So I honestly wasn't sure what to think about this book when I finished it, because there's a lot of this book that just feels very melancholy. And I personally am not a huge fan of World War I or World War II books at all. I just don't. I don't know if it's a result of watching Legends of the Fall or Saving Private Ryan at too young of an age and feeling traumatized, or the fact that they are just grisly war books. I don't like reading about them, especially when it's on the battlefield or you're seeing the effects of the war, you know? And I think also the way that this book just felt largely hopeless. There wasn't a lot guiding this book that felt hopeful, which I think is a big difference in how the Bear and the Nightingale series feels. There's this element of hope and overcoming in that series that this book really lacks. This is a standalone, and the storytelling I felt was interesting. Like I said, when I got to a certain point in this book, I felt like I couldn't put it down. I wanted to know what was happening. I wanted to put all the threads together of who is this mysterious figure, what happened to her brother, you know, how is this book gonna even end, and what's gonna happen to all these characters. There are a lot of side characters that I really loved, which I haven't mentioned either, that I think add a lot of insight and depth into Laura and Freddie and Winter. But I just feel like I really struggled about what to rate this book, and I'm not entirely sure that I'm settled on a star rating, because initially I finished it and I thought this is a 4-star read. And then the more I got thinking about it and I started really thinking about how this book made me feel, I think it's closer to a 3. So I think I'm going to settle on a 3.5, and I'm going to round it up to 4. So this wasn't a knock it out of the park type of book for me, but I just absolutely love the way Catherine Arden writes. I love how she puts words together. I love how she creates her stories. And I just loved getting a chance to be back in her writing once again. So while I didn't entirely love this book, I still can really appreciate it. And I don't think that it's bad at all. I actually really enjoyed a lot of it. I just wish, for my own personal preference, especially if we're talking about anything that has fantasy in it, I personally want there to be this feeling of hope and overcoming, you know? I think that that is something, the hero's journey in fantasy, that's very common. That's one reason why I like fantasy so much, is because it has a similar type of hopeful ending as romance does. That feeling of overcoming, triumphing, good over evil. And, you know, romance has the HEA, the happily ever after. So I think I'm going to settle on a 3.5, 4. I did enjoy it, but I definitely was hoping for... I was definitely hoping for her to give me that feeling of hope and overcoming at all costs, and I think that would have been really powerful in a World War I book, but also I recognize that because it is based in, you know, this historical element, and World War I was, and World War II were both so tragic and devastating, I can see how that maybe wasn't what she was going for, but I still was hoping for it. So there is a little bit of a very little hint of romance in here too, both with Freddie and Winter and with Laura and her love interest, but it wasn't overwhelming at all, and it wasn't like the focus of the story. The focus really is Laura trying to find her brother, and her brother sort of dealing with everything that had happened to him, and the whole question of, is he alive? Is he not? What's happening to him? So I did enjoy it, but... Hi, it's been 2 days since I finished The Warm Hands of Ghosts, and I just had to come in here and tell you that I am changing my star rating, because this is a book that I cannot stop thinking about. I can't stop thinking about the characters. I can't stop thinking about certain passages. I can't stop thinking about just the overall feeling of this book. And while it did feel like, the main reason that I was giving it a lower rating is because it didn't have what I wanted it to have, which was a feeling of hopefulness. And I feel like a lot of this book feels very hopeless, but there is a spark of hope, even if it's just a small one. And in that way, it reminds me in feel to one of my favorite books of all time, which is The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which is very hopeless, but there is a tiny spark of hope at the end. So I feel like I was wanting this to give me the same feeling of triumph and hope that her Winter Night series did, and it just doesn't. But that's not to say that there is no hope in this, it's just not as strong as I wanted it to be. So anyway, I am going to give this book 5 stars, but it's not at all in the same type of 5-star as The Bear and the Nightingale is. Like, that whole series is fabulous. So I think this is probably like 4.5 rounded up to 5 instead of 3.5 rounded up to 4. Because I think there's just too much about this book that is just like worked its way into my soul that I just can't stop thinking about. So there's my caveat that this book, I'm changing my star rating. It's a 4.5 rounded up to a 5-star. All right, that's all I'm going to talk about this book. I'll have another clip when I read my next book that I want to talk to you about. Hello, my friends. I've finished another book, so let's talk about it. Okay, so I finished reading The Belle of Belgrave Square by Mimi Matthews. This series has been on my radar for a really long time. My friend Jesson read the first book and she didn't really like it, so it kind of put me off. But, I mean, after I've read her books and I've heard some things about these and I've had several of you recommend them to me, I believe Lindy on Instagram recommended this to me, and I know that, I think it's Millie recommended The Siren of Sussex to me, so specifically recently. But yeah, these are books that I've known of, that I've bought. Like, I bought this book as soon as it came out and I just haven't gotten to it until now. So I wasn't quite sure what to think about this book, and I did read this out of order. You don't need to read these in order. There's one mention, like I'm currently reading the first book on my Kindle physically, so it's going to take me a while. And there's one mention of that heroine in here. You don't need to read them in order. Just my opinion. But I'm also the type of person that's like, I will not put myself through unnecessarily reading just to complete a series in order if it's not like a continuing series, you know, like story, and where this is just like different characters. You don't need to read it in order. But if that's the type of personality you are, go do you. But I'm not going to do that. So this book was fabulous. I really, really enjoyed this book. This was a wonderful historical romance. It is quite long. I listened to the audiobook. It's not long, like it only has like 400 pages, but the audiobook was like 15 hours. And I really enjoyed the audiobook. It has dual narration. I'm already a huge fan of Mimi Matthews' writing. I think that she has such a gift with putting words together, and also very specifically creating characters. She is very good at creating characters that you can relate to, that you can like feel a lot of sympathy and empathy for, and she also does a really, really excellent job of building her romances slowly and gradually, and she inserts in her romances very small details that I really appreciate. Like there were, so let me get to the premise of this. So our basic premise is our heroine, Julia, is a very wealthy young woman, and she has like crippling social anxiety, and she avoids balls at all costs. The only time that she feels any sense of like peace is when she's riding her giant horse, which society tells her she should not do because she's a woman, or when she's reading. Like, she's also a hopeless romantic, and she loves reading romance novels. And the thing that I really liked about that inclusion here is that a lot of times I feel like, especially in historicals, when the heroine really loves reading romance, it's not romance, it's like smut, basically, like scandalous romances. And the hero is always like, oh, you like those naughty books, you know? And I'm tired of that plot line. It's very basic. It's very obvious. Let's stop doing that, because it's dumb. It's boring and, you know, low-hanging fruit. That's how, if I could sum up how I feel about sort of the over-inclusion of any type of like erotica or sexiness in books that are supposed to be romances, I'm just sort of like, you're going for the low-hanging fruit. This is too obvious. It's doing nothing for me because it's boring. So anyway, I am being sassy about that. No apologies though. So her parents are ill, and she sort of is ill as well, but she kind of fakes it so that she can avoid these social interactions, even to the point where her parents will call the doctor in to like do bloodletting on her because she is so desperate not to go to these social interactions, which just cracks me up. So she ends up having a chance meeting with Jasper, who he was a captain. He's hailed as a military hero, and he has 3 bastard children. Something happened in the military that kind of paints him in a very unflattering light in society, along with the fact that he allows these 3 bastard children to live with him, and, you know, that's another thing that society has frowned upon. So he, and combined with the fact that he doesn't really have any money to support both his home and his children, he's in need of an heiress. He needs to marry a rich woman, and of course no good woman with a fortune will have him because of all the reasons that I just listed. However, Julia and Jasper, when they meet, they have this connection that they feel with one another, sort of like a kinship. They talk about shared interests, and they end up running into each other throughout the first beginning part of the book, and they have that same feeling of, I maybe like him, you know, like not in like a super romantic way, but like there's something there, and I liked the subtlety of that as well. And then there comes a point when Jasper finds out that she is an heiress, and this is where I think it starts to get really interesting, because he is starting to develop like a fondness for her, and so he's initially really put off by the idea of marrying her purely for her fortune to help himself, but at the same time he feels like this would be a good option. I think she would, you know, I think she would agree to marry me, and I also think that we could be happy together. So he never like presents that to her until he comes in on her when her parents are having a bloodletting done to her, and he's basically furious that they're abusing her, and he rescues her, like whisks her away in his arms, and she asks her to marry him, and she agrees, and they go hastily get married. Now, her parents are ill, and one of the stipulations for allowing her to have her dowry is that she lives in town in London, and that her husband will as well, because they need somebody to take care of them. So, you know, the hero knows this, and he knows he is not meeting all those demands because he doesn't live in town, and he still asks her to marry him, and he still does marry her. Little does he know that she has access to it in other ways. So I really liked that inclusion, how he, you know, decided finally that he wanted to rescue her. He didn't want to see her suffering at the hands of her parents and what he felt like was an abuse, and so he took her, and they get married, and thus begins their marriage, which I believe they get married around like 45% of the book. So a lot of the book is them married and trying to make a go of it, and to get to know each other, and for her to get to know his children and learn things about each other. Now, the only stipulation that he really had when they got married is, you know, you cannot ask me about my past, and you cannot go in my locked room, sort of like a Bluebeard aspect retelling. Like, he will not allow her to go in there. So she, of course, has her curiosity piqued, but she decides that she's gonna, you know, honor his request and not go in there. Eventually she does, and plot things unfold because of what she finds out in there. But I really, truly loved this book. I thought that the setup for it was very unique. I felt like there were what could be very typical historical romance tropes or conventions that we see done all the time, like maybe the sexy books, like maybe the social anxiety type of thing and how she is circumnavigating that. And I also really liked the inclusion of how much she loved animals and her horse, and that was something really important to her. That was one of her stipulations, that he wouldn't prevent her from having animals because her parents kind of always did. And I just loved it. I loved watching their relationship grow over time, very gradually. I also really liked, this was also something that I felt like was fresh and unique for a historical, when they get married, one of her requests is that they not consummate the marriage that night, and they want to get to know she wants to get to know him and have him get to know her. And when she says that, you know, he is initially like, oh, you know, like disappointed. And then he's like, well, why? And she's like, well, I'd like us to get to know each other before we do that. And he's like, well, people typically get to know each other. That's one way people typically get to know each other. And she's like, but I would prefer if we actually get to know each other. And I have to say, after reading, you know, like, it's only been recently that I've really strictly had a preference for closed door romances. And I am finding so much about them that I feel like is very fresh, and which allows us to explore other aspects of the relationship that I think are too often not even touched upon when so much steam is included, or when, and I'm not saying anything about your preferences, I'm just saying that I'm finding it really enjoyable that a book like this, that is beautifully written, that is very slow paced, and that is a gradual unfolding of the relationship, is still really compelling for me to read, to the point that it was almost like unputdownable. And also, like, we're able to explore these other aspects of their relationship where they can get to know one another and they can have these exchanges that are intimate without always being sexual. I think that is, again, I'm talking about it again, I'm sorry, that's one of many of the things that I don't like about romances that focus on that, is because then it really makes it so that's the go-to response. If anything is happening in the relationship, it's always like, well, it has to be sexual, or it has to be this. And it's just like, you know, there are other ways for romances to grow and evolve that don't have anything to do with that. And I think that we're missing out on a lot of tender and beautiful moments because of that. And, you know, the moment when he rescues her, the moment when they share a bed, but they don't actually, like, do anything in the marriage bed, it was just so lovely and sweet how they felt about waking up next to each other and seeing these little moments of intimacy where he, like, unbuttons his shirt and he undoes her corset and he brushes her hair, and how much, like, that means to her. And I just think that an author like Mimi Matthews, who can really convey that to the reader, that sense of intimacy and that sense of a relationship building and love beginning to form through these little tiny gestures, is an author that I really can get behind. I love to see authors really use their craft in a way that is not obvious, that is not low-hanging fruit, but is a way that is taking a little more care, skill, and nuance. Like, that's what I want to see. And I just loved this book for that reason so much. Like, and there was a moment in here, which is one of the most subtly but beautifully romantic my wife type of moments, because, you know, when he rescues her initially from the bloodletting, he feels very protective, and then they get married, and he's reflecting on how he feels about her and how protective he is of her, and he has this moment where he's thinking, and he recognizes that there was a change that happened when I felt protective, I care about her, I want to make sure she's safe, to when the vows were said and she, you know, declared, now she is your wife, he said something to the effect of, I will protect her at all costs. Like, he was ferociously protective of her, and he recognizes it's because she's officially his wife now. And I'm just sort of like, it's just so romantic, and I love it so much. So I really, really enjoyed this. I loved the inclusion of the children. I loved the unraveling of the bigger background plot. Like, it was very, very well done. I just loved everything about this, and it was a 5-star read, and I highly, highly recommend it. I think it was fantastic, and I cannot wait to read more from this author because it was just such a good time. So yeah. All right. There is another book that I have read for you. I'm going to go about my day, and I will come back when I'm going to try and include one more book in this video, and then I'll put it up for you guys. So thank you so much for listening. I'll see you when I have one more book to review. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to my channel. So this is the last book that I'm going to be reviewing in this recent reads video. And you'll have to let me know what you thought about this type of video. It's kind of a mix. It's not really a vlog because I didn't really vlog anything about my life, but hopefully it wasn't too disjointed as I reviewed a book and then came back and reviewed a different book. But I have one more book that I finished that I want to talk about, and it is The Lady and the Highwayman by Sarah Eden. So Sarah Eden is the author of a book I read recently that I did vlog about called Seeking Persephone. She writes closed-door historical romances, and I really loved Seeking Persephone. I thought it was really romantic and very sweet and charming, and I loved it. I thought it was great, you know. So I wanted to try another book by her, and I had several checked out from my library on the audio on Libby. And this one is the first in a new series, so it is... I think the series is the Penny Dreadful Society. My hair, I just washed my bangs and they always separate like that. And it drives me nuts. But, so I apologize. I'm not gonna mess with them, I promise. So it's the first in a new series, and this book had such a cool premise because it is set in Victorian time period, and we have our heroine Elizabeth, who is a headmistress of this boarding school. She's very well respected, and she's also the author of, I think they're called Silver Fork novels, basically. So they are these novels, it's probably a term that you know of, I'd never heard it before, but it's fiction for like the upper crust of society. Like, it's very respectable, it's very, looked at and thought of as something that is really great and admirable, instead of like some of the other times when we read books where fiction is sort of like, oh, that's a little silly romance novel, you know, like these Silver Fork novels. They feature books of people of the ton, of the upper echelon. I don't even believe it's the ton because it's in Victorian time, but like the higher society people, and that's who the audience is. So she's very, very, very accomplished with both her writing and as a headmistress. She's very well respected. But the interesting thing about her is that, like, by night, when she's not a headmistress, she has a pseudonym of Mr. King, where she is writing Penny Dreadful novels, which are very, very popular among the men of the working class at the time, because they dealt with a lot of things that were, like, you know, not acceptable for high society. So, like, things that are maybe like vampires, or anyway, it's very, very fun. So she loves writing those Penny Dreadful novels, and she is very successful. She's like a rising star. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the hero in this book, Fletcher, grew up, you know, very poor, very underprivileged, and he has sort of worked his way tooth and nail to be a Penny Dreadful writer, and he's very successful. So at the time, he was the most successful Penny Dreadful author, and he even founded what is called the Penny Dreadful Society, where him and several other men who write these Penny Dreadful novels, who also came from nothing and worked their way up, have banded together to help those who are underprivileged, like both with their social and, you know, society standings, where they are underprivileged and, you know, maybe they're from different countries or they're from different races, and they're working to get like social justice movements to help them in society. So that's like a secret Penny Dreadful society where all of these authors are doing that, and they use the finances from Fletcher's Penny Dreadfuls to make that possible, to help like children get out of factories and find them employment if they're orphans or things like that. So also the children that the Penny Dreadful Society, they show up as characters throughout this book, and it's very endearing watching the hero and heroine work together and help these children. So Fletcher is concerned because his finances are taking a hit, and he's worried how that's going to affect his work with the Penny Dreadful Society and helping these underprivileged people and children. So he finally approaches Elizabeth. I'm not entirely sure how they end up approaching one another. And he asks for her help because she's so well respected in the, you know, the fictional world. He's like, do you know who Mr. King is? I need to try and bring him down so that he doesn't take all my profits and he doesn't tell her about the Penny Dreadful Society. So Elizabeth, knowing full well that she is Mr. King, that's her pseudonym, she agrees to help him find who this author is, if for no other reason than to make sure he doesn't discover her secret. So we have this game of sort of like cat and mouse where she's sort of helping him find out who this author is, and they have such great banter. They have really fun banter together. They have a lot of fun flirtatious moments. They do have a lot of chemistry from the beginning and a connection for sure. But I did feel like the romance kind of under-delivered on this one. It definitely wasn't as strong as what I read in Seeking Persephone. It was more focused on the overall plot of these authors. So you have like warring authors and who is Mr. King, and the whole thing about Penny Dreadfuls was just really fun and interesting. And then the children as they come up, and he, you know, gets Elizabeth to help him sort of find homes or working arrangements for these children so that they can survive and get out of like the streets and things like that. So all of those things lend to Elizabeth really falling for Fletcher, but Fletcher falls hard for Elizabeth. Like, he is very smitten with her, and he is basically a flirt with everyone that he meets. And so, you know, she's kind of warned of that, like, hey, he's just a flirt, he's flirting with everyone. And pretty soon she's like, but he's kind of really flirting with me, so does he like me? And it's very cute, it's very fun, very solid background plot, which I really, really enjoyed. So if you like a background plot that is strong, that is more than just the relationship, I think you would really like this. I thought the writing was very deft and very good. Like, I really like this author's writing. I think she has a really good grasp on building characters and plotting and storytelling, and just her prose is really, really great. So I enjoyed this a lot, but I am only going to give it 4 stars instead of 5 stars because I still felt like the declaration of love between them came too soon, and I didn't feel like we had enough moments to really fully believe that they were in love. And I think that maybe because I'm coming off of reading the Mimi Matthews book, The Belle of Belgrave Square, which I just talked about in my last clip, which I felt was so deeply romantic. Like, there were so many beautiful moments in that book where the romance was just building with these small gestures, with these lingering glances, with this introspection about, maybe I feel like this about her, or maybe I feel like it was beautifully romantic, you know? And so I think that maybe that made it so I didn't feel the romance enough in here, because that's not how The Lady and the Highwayman is. It's not that level of tiny gestures romantic. Like, it just doesn't feel as romantic, but it was still a romance, and it was still very solid storytelling, and I still had a fun time reading it. And it's very short. Like, the audiobook I think was 7 or 8 hours, and it was fun. I liked it a lot. So I'm still very impressed with this author, Sarah Eden, and I'm definitely going to be reading more from her. But of the two of them, I definitely prefer Seeking Persephone, which was just a super sweet, romantic, great Beauty and the Beast retelling that felt very fresh but also familiar. So this one was fun and solid, and I do want to continue the series, but it wasn't quite what I was hoping for the romance to be. And I think that's possibly because, like I said, like the Mimi Matthews, but also because I was maybe, when I read Seeking Persephone by her, which I felt like was really, really romantic, that set the bar so high that I kind of expected all of her books to be in that same tone, and this one just wasn't. But it was still really solid, really fun, very unique plot, and I liked it a lot. So, okay, my friends, there you have it. I apologize for talking so much about every book. Maybe that's why I shouldn't do videos like this, because then I'm like, I can just talk about one book for 15 minutes. But it was fun. Thank you for watching this video. Vlogmas is approaching, and I kind of had thought to myself I wasn't going to do Vlogmas. Like, last year what I did is I posted a video every single day from December 1st until Christmas. I definitely don't think I'm going to I cannot do that this year. That was so stressful, and it was just a lot, and I was really getting behind on a lot of other things in life to get those videos out. But I would still like to maybe vlog. I just can't imagine, after 3 years of vlogging every day in December and having my daily tea tasting and taking you guys along with me, I kind of can't imagine not doing that again. So let me know if you are interested at all in seeing daily vlogs, even if they're not published every day. I will maybe do like a weekly, but I will vlog every day and do a tea tasting every day. Anyway, let me know your opinion on that. Let me know if you have heard of these books, if you want to read them, or anything at all. And if you have made it this far, please feel free to leave me a rose emoji. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.